Good morning, Robert Scribbler here with the OBX wave report here on March the 8th. And we have a pretty windy day, pretty blustery day here on the Outer Banks as strong north-northwest winds in the near gale force range to gale force range rake across the coastlines and push a large swell out of the North Atlantic. Large swell ranging from 8 to 9 feet in the near offshore waters, and this swell is translating to the coastline in various ways, with mostly waves in the range of 3 to 7 feet, depending on your location. And you can see some of the spray and chop in the images provided. Pretty intense situation on the coastline there with a strong cross-shore current and large swells coming at a high angle to the coastline. So any surfer that does get out there today is going to have to fight the surf coming in at a high angle as well as deal with a stiff current that will swiftly push them down the coast. Likely also some rather stiff riptides and other currents as well, given the high angle of the surf heading toward the beaches. All right, so let's get into some of our analysis here today. I did talk about strong ocean storms and yesterday, and these strong ocean storms are forming. We have a strong ocean storm right now off the US East Coast with powerful winds circulating around it in the range of looks like near 50-mile-an-hour sustained winds near the center of the storm. Actually higher than that, about near 60-mile-an-hour sustained winds in the center of the storm. So you probably got hurricane force gusts out here just off the US East Coast. So this powerful storm helping to push that large swell in toward the Outer Banks. And then we have a second storm here out in the central North Atlantic. And the central North Atlantic has been a major zone for storm formation. These storms are pushing a swell toward the East Coast as well as pushing a larger swell here toward Europe. So we've got big waves on both sides of the North Atlantic due to two storm systems right now. And over time, we expect to see a progression of storms out here in the North Atlantic with some powerful surf as well. And that's the main story right now for the OBX wave report and for the waves here in the Outer Banks, as well as for the waves in Europe. We're going to look at some wave models at the end of our report, but I did want to show you the storm systems swirling off the coastline. As we get closer to the United States, you see that the lower 48 is experiencing a powerful storm system here, or gathering storm system here in the central US. This is going to be the next impulse for the US East Coast and the next ocean storm in a long progression of ocean storms that we've experienced. And generally here for the Outer Banks, we've got colder conditions with those north winds, temperatures in the lower 40s, not expected to get up much above the mid 40s today here in the Outer Banks. So colder conditions, this is the first impulse of cold air that has been nipped out of the Arctic by two warm air invasions, one coming in over Greenland and the other coming in over Alaska and the Bering Sea. And these two invading streams of warm air have cut off a chunk of the cold air, pushed it over Canada. And here in the United States, we're facing the onrush of that cold air, particularly in the US East Coast. And it's expected to remain relatively cold for most of this week and the next week, with periods of strong north winds and intermittent storminess. But the main feature is the cold air rushing in, and this cold air rushing in does provide a lot of energy for those ocean storms in the form of instability, and also is likely to clash with the Gulf moisture and heat down in the south and produce some severe weather for parts of the central United States. I did talk a little bit about some risk of nor'easters for the US East Coast And that risk is still there, although we don't really see anything consistent in the models indicating a severe nor'easter. But nonetheless, with that cold air rushing south and slamming into those warmer than normal Atlantic Ocean waters, waters warmed by the climate crisis, we do have more energy in the system. So we are going to be keeping a weather eye to events out here in the Atlantic. Looking to the US West Coast, we do expect to see an intensifying progression of storms for the US West Coast, and it's swinging toward rather severe again. And we're probably going to see record snowpacks for California, parts of California, and record precipitation totals for this winter, which is good news for the drought, although bad news for folks getting hammered by a series of severe storms, storm after storm after storm here on the West Coast. So we've seen swings between drought and flood here, particularly for California. And this has a climate crisis imprint. You do tend to get more extremes as evaporation and precipitation both intensify as the Earth's climate heats up. And of course, this distribution is not even over the surface of the Earth, and the US West Coast is one of those regions that tends to be a hotspot for more extremes when it comes to both drought and flood. And the longer term tendency, at least according to the predictions, is for drought. And we have seen that for the US West, but not to say that there won't also be severe storms as well. It's just kind of this manic shift from one state to the other. Right now, we're clearly in the wet state, and you might want to do a little research on the climate science aspects of this. There's been a lot of talk among climatologists and climate scientists on the issue of these severe swings in precipitation. So I encourage you to take a look at that. For those of you on the West Coast, also please pay attention to your local weather and emergency management folk because things are starting to look potentially pretty intense over the next week. All right, so for the lower 48, we've got the enhanced cloud tops model provided by Levi Cohen over at Tropical Tidbits, and we've got some severe weather moving through parts of Arkansas and the Mississippi River Valley, seeing some rainfall right now. Looks like we've got some snows up here in northern Minnesota, parts of the Great Lakes, and a couple of systems moving into the US West firing off some precipitation. Again, here in the east, it's clear with cold northerly and northwesterly winds coming in off the Atlantic Ocean and off the continent. Getting into the National Weather Service radar, I did want to show you all of the alerts up. We've got a lot of alerts up for California right now with those storms coming in off the West Coast. We've got some heavy storms. I said severe weather. I guess it's not too crazy severe because I don't see much in the way of severe thunderstorm warnings here. Looks like we've got one coming west of Fort Worth, but just a large, massive of rain here in the Mississippi River Valley region running through Arkansas, slamming into Memphis and getting into parts of Tennessee and Mississippi as well. And then for the East Coast, we're under gale warnings here in the Outer Banks and for parts of the Delmarva. And we've got those strong north-northwest winds blowing in off the Atlantic Ocean with those heavy seas. So we've got small craft advisories up as well. Now, looking at the next 7 days, I did talk about the potential for very severe weather out here in California, particularly for mountain snows in central California and northern California. But just look at this precipitation forecast lighting up for California with expected precipitation in the range of looks like anywhere between 5 and 15, possibly more inches of water-based precipitation, and converting that to snow, that could be considerable, feet of snowfall. So yeah, so we're looking at some very serious precipitation for areas of Central California on northward. Looks like getting a little bit into Southern California, but mainly this is a Central California on northward event. And then for Washington and Oregon, also under the gun for some heavy precipitation. But looks like right now California is the hot spot. And yeah, so please pay attention out there. We've got, again, a potential for severe weather and heavy storms here in the Texas through Georgia region, including Tennessee, Arkansas, northern Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. And then in the offshore environment, we've got a tendency for nor'easters to form. And this has really been the trend for at least the past month, and if not for longer. And this trend looks like it's going to continue with that cold air diving down south, clashing with the warm, moist air over the North Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. So getting down to our local observations, I've got a lot of local observations for you guys today. We're going to start out at Jeanette's Pier as we always do. And right now, the waves are 4 to 6 feet at Jeanette's Pier. Um, there was some we had some impetus to get down to the coastline and go surfing today. I'm training or helping a new surfer learn the ropes, and she was kind of raring to go, but I was like, looks kind of cold and crazy out there, especially for a new surfer, and especially with that. There's this very severe cross shore current. So we've got 4 to 6 waves, severe cross shore current, 33 miles per hour north northwest winds in a gale force, or I'm sorry, near gale force with probably some gale force gusts. That wind coming in cross shore. And we got an 8-second swell out of the north northeast at 8.5 feet. So rather gnarly conditions. I mean, in the Wayback Machine, back when I was kind of a little bit more experienced or a little bit more in form, I was probably crazy enough to go out there. But you know, if you go out today and you jump in that current, you're gonna have to be prepared to walk like a half mile down the beach every half an hour or so. Just the speed of the current is just nuts. It will just carry you very swiftly down the coastline. So and you're going to see like continuously changing conditions as you drift across bar after bar after bar. And here in the Outer Banks, we've also got some pretty serious rip tide. So all those things you're going to have to pay attention to if you do get out in the surf today. So pretty changeable, very crazy conditions. And then with that large swell coming in at a high angle to the surf, you can get this kind of like almost like a turbine kind of effect from the waves breaking. So as you try to duck dive through the waves, you kind of get twisted. So it's pretty serious out there right now. So only for the most experienced surfers. Right now, air temperatures are 42 degrees Fahrenheit and ocean water temperatures 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And the weather conditions are clouds with patches of sun. And expected high today of 46 degrees and expected to remain windy throughout the day, although winds might drop off as we continue throughout the day today and into tomorrow. Now, getting another observation, I did want to talk to you about Bathhouse. We're going to get up to Bathhouse here um, over near the Wright Brothers Memorial, just south, kind of near Captain George, over in this area here. So we're going to get up to Bathhouse, and Bathhouse is experiencing the largest waves on the Outer Banks right now in the range of 6 to 7 feet, with winds coming out of the north northwest at 30 miles per hour. That is a cross shore flow. The primary swell is coming in at 8 seconds at 9 feet out of the north northeast. So very large primary swell right now. Air temperatures at Bathhouse a little bit colder at 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Ocean water temperatures also a degree colder at 52. And for the weather today, we expect clouds with patches of sun, high 46 as well, and very windy. All right, so let's get on down south for some other observations. It's worth noting that as the coastline cants more toward the east, that north-northwest wind ticks more offshore and we have smaller waves. And so at S turns right now, we've got 3 to 4 foot waves. At Rodanth, also 3 to 4 foot waves. And then as the Outer Banks makes that turn more toward the south and west, we get those beaches starting to look more toward the southeast. And so as we get down to Avon, we have smaller waves as well. Still rough conditions with those strong winds, but 2 to 4 foot waves as opposed to 4 to 6 or 6 to 7 as we're seeing in the north. All right, and getting on down to Buxton, I'm going to go ahead and provide you with a comprehensive report on Buxton waves. Buxton seems to get all the waves in the Outer Banks, and despite the wind blowing from the northwest, the reports that I'm getting from Buxton right now are showing 5 to 6 foot waves striking the coastline there. We've got 31 mile per hour north-northwest winds, which are offshore, and the swell coming in at 8 seconds out of the north-northeast. That swell is 9.5 feet, not entirely translating to the coastline, as we can see. But air temperatures right now are 44 degrees Fahrenheit, ocean water temperatures 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And the weather conditions are clouds with patches of sun, windy, and an expected high today of 47 degrees Fahrenheit. And that concludes our local observations. We'll note that the south-facing beaches here in Frisco and Billy Mitchell are considerably smaller, with waves ranging in the 1 to 3, maybe an occasional 4 foot swell, but probably not with those north winds, mostly blown out down there. All right, so let's look at some of the climate picture here. I did talk about the warm air invasion of the Arctic, pinching off the cold air, and we've got that. We've got let's get into the Fahrenheit. So we've got temperatures that are near, yeah. So like we've got some hot spots here over the Bering Sea where temperatures are near freezing, which is very warm for this time of year. I know say near freezing, very warm, but this is the high Arctic. And so temperatures are 30, 40, 50 degrees colder typically this time of year. So we've got this warm air invasion cutting a slice through the cold Arctic air mass and coming from the south over Alaska here and just slicing across the Arctic. And then we still have warm air in place. And I say warm air, it's relatively warm in the range of 30, 40, and 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal over parts of the Canadian archipelago, Baffin Bay, and then the west coast of Greenland here. And these two plugs of much warmer than normal air are pushing cold Arctic air out onto the continent. And so we've got air temperatures in the range of negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit out here, negative 40 in some locations over Alaska. So amazing that we see temperatures further to the north here over the Arctic Ocean looking like 30, so almost 70 degrees warmer here off of Barrow than it is on the continent. So 70-degree temperature differential, kind of an upside down here in the weather, with temperatures colder to the south and warmer to the north in the Arctic. And that cold air mass that has been blown off the pole, just you can see it's just kind of been sliced off, is sinking down slowly across Canada. And that cold air sinking down is what's helping to provide the impetus for these fronts sweeping through and the cold north winds here on the East Coast. And over the next week, these coming weeks, this cold air will tend to sink and provide for some onrush of cold air and possible severe weather as well. And I do want to show you the anomaly map showing the 30, 40, and 50 degree Fahrenheit above normal temperatures here near Barrow. And similarly out here near Hudson Bay and the Canadian archipelago, with temperatures near Greenland in the range of 20 to 30, maybe some 40-degree above normal temperatures in parts of Greenland as well. And you can also see this slice of much warmer than normal air hanging over the North American continent with the remnant cold being sucked down into the continent, and we're starting to see the anomalies push eastward and southward. Although you do see the heat from the Gulf and the Atlantic fighting back and trying to push up through the Mississippi River Valley, which is providing an impetus for some of the stormy weather that we're seeing there. And I did want to show you the anomalies. So globally, temperatures are about 8 degrees Celsius. These are in Kelvin, but they convert readily to Celsius. So about 8 degrees Celsius above normal, which is about 1.3 degrees Celsius, 8 degrees Celsius above the 1981 to 2010 time frame. That's about 1.3 degrees Celsius above 1880s temperatures. The Arctic is about 0.6 degrees Celsius above normal overall, the tropics about zero point 0.4, and the Antarctic about zero point 0.4. And you can just see the distribution of those anomalies in this map. And over the next 8 to 14 days, we expect to see below normal temperatures across most of the US as that remnant cold from the Arctic sinks south. And it's worth noting that much below normal temperatures are expected to persist over parts of the West, with the East getting a little chunk of it, and above normal temperatures pushing in toward Texas. And this might be some ingredients for severe weather as this cold air mass out to the west and over the Rockies clashes with the warm air mass over the Gulf and over Texas. Ocean water is much warmer than normal, and then the remnant cold moving in. And we do see some of the tendency for severe weather here in the form of above normal precipitation for most of the United States, and particularly above normal precipitation again for parts of California and the US Southwest. So something to keep an eye on. For the next 3 days, getting closer to our present time frame, we don't have too much in the way of major severe weather risk in the form of thunderstorms, and so we'll have to keep a weather eye on that with that warm air mass to the south, but we haven't seen too much in the way of severe weather over the past couple of days. And then looking at the weather maps, the global forecast system model, right now we do see the nor'easter off the US East Coast and the weather over the central US gathering and the storm systems sweeping in through the US West Coast. And I'm going to go ahead and advance this model. And as we get into tomorrow, the storm system off the US East Coast lingers and intensifies as the wet weather in the central US gathers into a storm system that starts to sweep toward the east on Friday. And we can expect a low pressure system to form around the Great Lakes. This is pretty consistent with the pattern for the entire winter. And then a trough to form along the US East Coast and move eastward, as well as the energy transfers off the US East Coast on the day on Saturday, producing another pretty strong nor'easter offshore that rapidly intensifies in those warmer waters out in the Gulf Stream and warmer than normal waters driven by climate change. And then strengthens through the day on Saturday and then goes a little bit retrograde, heading southeast and kicking those strong northeasterly winds behind it into Sunday and then heading offshore. And this is a slight variation in the prediction from yesterday, but still basically the same pattern. We'll talk about a little bit more about that as we get into the wave models. And then right behind it, we've got another storm system coming through on Monday and looking like another potential nor'easter for the Outer Banks on Monday, late Monday, and then heading offshore as we get into Tuesday. And then cold air coming in behind it. It's going to get cold according to the forecasts in the next week, possibly into the upper 30s, which is just not fun. And I see snow out here over the ocean. That's kind of freaky. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see a flurry or two in the middle of next week. I hope not, but yikes. We get that cold air sinking down from the Arctic and blowing that cold air out over the ocean. It's coming into conflict with the warm, moist air over the water, producing that field of precipitation you can see from those winds. You got almost ocean effect rain and maybe some ocean effect snow out there. And then still cold air blowing down from the north on Thursday. Just you can see that plug of cold air indicated by the snows out here in the Minnesota, running down through Wisconsin, parts of Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky, and then here off the US East Coast with those ocean effect snows coming up in the models. And then in the central US, you start to get this warm impulse and severe weather pushing up against the Arctic cold on Friday as the cold high pressure system associated with that starts to get shoved eastward, and then a warm front moving across the mid-Atlantic and the Outer Banks on Sunday of next week, with another front pushing through and another cold air impulse coming in on the 20th, but this one not getting as far to the south, it doesn't look like. And then another low pressure system gathering near Florida and turning into possibly a nor'easter for Florida before heading offshore and generating another powerful Atlantic storm. So just a narration of the dance of weather systems in the model. Of course, as we get further and further out, these predictions are less likely to be accurate. Okay, so last of all, let's look at the waves. And I'm gonna just look at the whole ocean model here. We're gonna make sure we are to now. And right now we are seeing like lots of waves all across the North Atlantic in conjunction with those two storm systems that we talked about earlier in the wave report. And there are some big stories here for Portugal and France, as near offshore waves are in the range of about 13 feet, 12 to 13 feet for both locations, and large waves hitting in toward the southern Irish and southwestern UK coasts. And I'm just going to go ahead and advance this model so you can see this plug of very large waves heading toward the beaches of France and the UK tomorrow, with significant wave heights in the nearshore environment in the range of about 31 feet. This for France and the UK. So major wave event here for parts of Western Europe into the day tomorrow. And so definitely keep a weather eye out for you big wave surfers. This might be some interesting times for parts of Ireland, France, and the southwest coast of the UK here. And then again, we've got this other big storm forming in the central North Atlantic as well. So let's go back to now, and I'm going to talk more about the Outer Banks. I did want to show you guys that crazy swell that's headed toward France. So right now in the Outer Banks in the near offshore environment, we've got wave heights in the range of about 8 to 10 feet. And this is expected to persist throughout today. By tomorrow, the wave heights are expected to fall down to more of a 5 to 7 foot range in the near offshore environment as that storm heads offshore and strengthens. So still large waves tomorrow. Winds will be tamping down, tend to be cooler and calmer. And then as we get into Friday, still cool conditions, but more of a base swell, less windy, waves coming mainly from the east. We've got a storm on Friday gathering out here that's supposed to sweep through later on Friday and into Saturday. But there's a bit of a lull here, and this might be a really good day for surfing if you're willing to brave the cooler temperatures. And then as we get into the day on Saturday, we get another coastal storm developing, with kicking up the surf in the range of about 7 to 10 feet in the near offshore environment. Some of the angle of these waves coming in are rather large, and so we might have some rather very large waves coming in on Saturday and then into Sunday as that storm system develops. And this has been pretty consistent forecast. I just wanted to go frame by frame to show you the storm develop. And so for Saturday and Sunday, we might see some extraordinarily large waves in places like Buxton. So we'll just have to keep an eye out and see how things develop Let's see. I don't think we can get much further than Sunday. I don't think we can get too much further than Sunday into the model, but I did want to show you how this storm, yet another large storm, develops off the U.S. East Coast and hurls some large swells toward us here on the Outer Banks, and then becomes a part of the storm track heading off toward Greenland and producing more big waves, or helping to produce more big waves for the UK and France and Spain and Ireland. All right. I did notice one other feature in the model here, and this one is a Hawaii feature, and I just want to show you guys this. So we've got a large swell associated with a storm system just north of Hawaii, and over the next day, this swell is going to start to sweep across some of the north beaches of Hawaii with significant wave heights near offshore for some of the northern and western islands in the range of about 19 feet. And then for the central islands, getting a little smaller in the range of about 14 feet. But these swells will sweep across the coastline, looks like, into the day on Thursday. So it looks like a good big wave day for Hawaii tomorrow. All right. So thank you for joining me for this session of the OBX Wave Report, where we discuss all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. And as I always do, I'd like to implore you all to please do everything you can to help speed the transition to clean energy, which will save our coastlines by replacing the harmful fossil fuels, which produce the greenhouse gases that are the main drivers for the climate crisis. Clean energy being wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles. These are the primary systems right now that are cost effective to mass deploy. There are other technologies available, but these technologies have not yet matured. Hopefully more will mature as time goes by. But these mature technologies, these mature clean energy technologies, are capable of achieving amazing scaling through manufacturing and hitting a kind of learning curve that is similar to the learning curve that we've seen in computer chips, just through the processes of improvement in manufacturing that go into them, particularly when it comes to batteries and solar. And there's a number of innovations coming downstream for particularly batteries and solar that will help to increase the competitiveness of these energy sources. Um, Getting behind these sources is kind of like getting behind a force of history. The transition is going to happen. It's just a question of how fast. And the more of us get on board earlier, the faster the transition happens, and then the less harm that ends up happening as a result of burning fossil fuels. Because when clean energy becomes more competitive, you burn less in the way of fossil fuels. And so I think I see this as like a very positive thing to focus on. Although for a special edition, we're also going to focus on some accountability, particularly with ConocoPhillips' Willow project, which is coming up in the news. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a special edition of the OBX Wave Report just in a moment here. But I do want to ask you guys to please do everything you can to help mass deploy clean energy and get behind that to help save our coastlines from the impacts of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning, those impacts being rising sea levels primarily and more intense storms. So thank you for joining me once more. It's an interesting and willy, wild and willy week out there on the Outer Banks, out here on the Outer Banks, on the edge of the world here today. So if you do get out in the surf, be careful. It's rough out there. But it does look like we're going to have some good wave days to come, particularly maybe later in the day on Thursday and particularly into Friday if you're willing to get into that cold water and cold air. So thank you for joining me once again, and I'll be